Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another fascinating guest today, helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Betilde Muñoz-Pogossian, who is Director of the Department of Social Inclusion at the Organization of American States, where for more than 15 years she has led missions, programs, and projects, conducted research on a variety of issues related to democracy and elections, as well as equity and social inclusion projects, among others. At the Department of Social Inclusion, she leads work in the area of inclusion of populations in vulnerable situations and on the promotion of full exercise of their human rights. Among her responsibilities, she also directs work on migration and refugees in support of the Organization of American States Secretary General and member states. Born in Venezuela, Dr. Muñoz-Pogossian holds a Ph.D. in political science from Florida International University, a master's degree in international relations from the University of South Florida, and she is the author of various academic publications and opinion columns on issues of democracy, human rights, migration, refugees, gender equity, and social inclusion, among other topics. And the OAS, Organization of American States, is an international organization. It was founded back in 1948 for the purposes of solidarity and cooperation among its various member states within the Americas. It's currently headquartered in the United States in Washington, D.C., and they have 34 members, which are independent states in the Americas. A lot of interesting topics to talk about today. Dr. Betilde Muñoz-Pogossian, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Ira, for the invitation to join your podcast and for that kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you today, as well as with your audience.
It's great to have you. I would love to start off, as we typically do, by giving you the floor for a little bit, just to talk a little bit more about yourself. If you could take us back just a little bit about when you developed some of these interests in political science, international relations, and then I noticed sort of before you became the director of this unique social inclusion group, you were very active in sort of the electoral studies and project section at OAS. You could talk about a little bit those early days. I think that'd be a great way to start things off.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, as you mentioned, I was born in Venezuela, but I came to the United States more than 20 years ago. So now I have lived more in the US than in Venezuela. And I've actually become a citizen of this wonderful country. But my interest for, issues that were public or that, involved other people and trying to solve problems for my community kind of emerged when I was in high school, because I was always the one trying to mediate conflict between, groups of people. I was always talking to everyone. I was kind of like the go-to person when, things got difficult, and even also for the professors when they were trying to, get messages to the rest of my, the student community. So, then I knew that I wanted to do something related either to law or political science. Mm-hmm. Then my parents brought us to the U.S. when they had an opportunity to come to study in this country. And I immediately knew that I wanted to do something related to that, and I opted to study political science. Once I was in there, of course, being in a country so international, so diverse, and the world opened to me, and I developed this interest on international relations, and I had the opportunity to do an internship at the United Nations when I was, my 21 or some 21 years old. And that really changed my outlook about the world and the things that could be done via multilateral organizations. And I decided to continue my master's degree, my PhD in political science, always trying to specialize in two realms: international relations as well as comparative politics, which is a way of understanding politics in which you make comparisons and find commonalities and differences too between the way that countries make decisions, political or societal decisions. When I was about to be done with my PhD, I applied for an internship at the Organization of American States. And while I was doing the internship here in Washington, D.C., I was offered a job that I did not think twice and took it. It was a very junior position, even though I had already concluded my master's and was pretty much done with my PhD. And that was really a great opportunity for me to develop a career in international relations. I've been at the OAS for more than 20 years and some months, really. It was 20 years last September. The first part of my career focusing on issues of democracy and elections. As you mentioned, I was chief of the electoral studies section within the Department of Electoral Observation and Cooperation. And I had the chance, the opportunity, and really the responsibility of helping to standardize the way OAS does election observation or election monitoring, as it is known. So I worked extensively on finding funding, developing projects, doing pilot implementations of the various methodologies that the OAS, I'm happy to say, is currently using on how to do elections in a standardized, more professional way. And that kind of it was like the perfect place to connect the practitioner side of my work at the OAS in a multilateral organization and the building on my academic background. I was done with my PhD by then, so kind of connecting the two things. It was a great opportunity. Then in 2015, this position, they created the Department of Social Inclusion. It's actually one of the youngest departments at the OAS. They, only 7 years old, and with another area, we are the youngest areas within the OAS. And I was given also the responsibility, a great chance to kind of put together an agenda of work that was kind of dispersed around the OAS, but did not really have a unifying mission, vision, and really value added to the countries of the region. So starting in 2015, I have been leading the work of the Department of Social Inclusion along 3 lines. One, dealing with equity promotion, poverty reduction, and economic, social, cultural rights. A second line of work dealing with the inclusion of groups in situations of vulnerability, including Afro-descendants, indigenous, LGBTI peoples with disability. And this is where the work on older persons is kind of framed in the team and in the way, the mandate that we have in the department. Right. And a third area of work, which used to be small, but now is actually the fastest growing and the most demanding, is the area of migration and forced displacement. Because of the, we can talk about this later, but the region is experiencing very intense mass migratory movements, and there's a lot of demand by member states to help them on this, and funding available to to do this for them.
So you mentioned you started this new segment in 2015, and as you were just saying, your purview is extremely broad in what you look at as the director of the Department of Social Inclusion. Talk for a little bit, if you would, because I think most of our experience, I walk around Washington, down by the mall, I'll walk by the Organization of American States, the beautiful building. When you're inside and sort of going about your day-to-day work, sort of how are your priorities handed down? I mean, do you get a phone call from, the ambassador of Guatemala or Chile, or say, hey, we got these problems and we want them to? How does it all work for you? Because it seems like you have an exceptional amount of things you have to focus on within the organization. Talk a little bit about sort of your day to day, if you would.
Yes, well, I guess on the issue of mandate, really, we abide by whatever the member states decide to make priorities via resolutions or official documents. So
Okay.
every June in the past, now with the pandemic, that's changed a little bit, but once a year, all foreign ministers of the 34 member states meet and decide on a body of resolutions that really provide the mandates of work for us at the OAS. So that's kind of like where we are, where we start in terms of defining the agenda of work. Additional to that, I must mention that we have within the Inter-American system a series of conventions, juridical instruments of human rights that kind of frame the work that we have to do in terms of the inclusion and access to rights agenda at the OAS. So just for you guys and for you to know that this is kind of like where we start. And then we act on specific requests by the member states. So when you say the Guatemalan ambassador comes and asks for some support on X or Y, it's really like that, because we cannot go into a country without their okay, without their visto bueno, we say, without them knowing and wanting for us to either provide a bilateral support or implement a project bilaterally, or do it in a, either with 3 countries or in a more regional type of approach. They have to be okay with us engaging with them. It's not something, I cannot go to a country and say, well, I realize that Guatemala has a problem or has challenges in terms of food security. I'm just gonna go, show up there and start implementing it. I cannot do that.
Sure.
We have to have their okay to be able to implement. And it's really, in 20 years working with governments, is the most effective way to get things done in a meaningful way.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And now drilling down a little bit on the topic of aging, the United Nations organization made a declaration that the 2021 to 2030 is now going to be known as the Decade of Healthy Aging. The Pan American Health Organization, which is a public health agency that's part of the UN system, serves as the regional office for the World Health Organization, has this mandate in healthy aging and promulgating, and you at the OAS focus on promoting their work and per what is known as the Intra-American Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. Can you unpack a little bit of that for us and a little bit about this specific mandate per your group?
Sure. Again, you were very clear in saying that the mandate to implement actions on the Decade for Healthy Aging fall within the realm of the PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, and we're very careful not to infringe on their mandate and the scope of work, because, for instance, when I'm talking about we were talking about the projects that we are able to implement, we do this through either the foreign ministries or the ministries of social inclusion or the human rights and justice ministries, whereas PAHO does the work through the ministries of health. We don't really deal directly with ministries of health. They do that, and again, on the issue of the decade, they have the mandate to help ministries of health implement the contents, the action items that are contained within this decade. On the part of the OAS, the OAS really serves, besides being the ideal political forum to discuss regional priorities, because 34 countries sit down, from Canada all the way to Argentina, and including the whole of the Anglo-Caribbean countries, is the perfect political space to discuss priorities. But we are, and also promote cooperation between countries, right? In the spirit of solidarity you were mentioning. But the OAS also serves as a depositary, is that the term, depositario, we say in Spanish, of the major conventions, of all the conventions dealing with human rights. So it's important to know that within the realm of the OAS, for many years, a convention was negotiated on ensuring or enforcing or promoting the rights of older persons. And this convention was approved in the context of a General Assembly of the OAS, and really becoming the first legally binding instrument in the world dealing with the promotion, protection, and recognition of the rights of older persons and under conditions of equality, and really with the kind of edge of ensuring their inclusion, integration, and participation in society. What we believe is that there's a lot of commonalities between what are the tenets of the decade on healthy aging and a lot of the commitments that member states have agreed to and that are contained in this convention. I must mention that so far only 8 countries have signed and ratified the convention.
Okay.
And these countries include Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, and Uruguay, right? So these are the countries that have decided to sign, you know, in the sense that their foreign ministry said, we're going to sign the document as an instruction of our executives, and have ratified it in Congress, because once it's signed, that, you know, this instrument needs to be taken to Congress and approved usually by 2/3 to be to be enforced in the country, and for the legislation in these countries to be harmonized according to what's contained in the convention. So, you know, just kind of like that was a parenthesis, but just to say that a lot of the contents of this convention are aligned with the contents of the action items on the decade of healthy aging. Just to put you, to, you know, give you a couple of examples.
Please.
The decade, one of the first action item on the decade of healthy aging is related to changing how we think, feel, and act towards age and aging. And there's specific articles in the convention that deal with the prevention of discrimination, the necessary transformation of attitudes towards age and older persons based on a culture of peace, and kind of invites countries to implement laws, projects, programs, and any other public policy measure to ensure the independence and autonomy and the right to participate and to be integrated in their communities of older persons. So, you know, if we could go into detail, but if you see the contents of the decade action items and you see the contents of the convention, there's a lot of commonalities, and we believe that by having more countries sign and ratify the Convention on Older Persons, we're also helping the implementation of the decade on healthy aging. They're definitely related.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just a couple weeks ago, you were part of a fascinating panel. It was within the DiploCraft program. It was entitled Innovations in Healthy Aging in Latin America. And you were there with folks like Ambassador Dr. Lorca from Costa Rica, who we've had on the show before, the Assistant Secretary of Aging, Ed Walker here, Ambassador for Argentina, amongst others. And it was a fascinating discussion, and you really broke down this topic in a really broad way, that, you know, obviously we have the decade of healthy aging, but there are many angles that we have to look at this issue from. And you went into areas, obviously, like it has to be, whenever we address these situations, it has to be equitable. We have to look at creating communities around healthy aging. We have to have evidence-based solutions. And once again, a lot of these issues, because you have a range of countries, once again, in the OAS that have different requirements, different economies, and so forth. Talk a little bit about this meeting, some of what you took away from it, and if you could just give us some of the takeaways from your perspective that you thought were most important to focus on.
Excellent. Well, as you say, it was a rich discussion, and I would definitely invite you know, your audience and anyone listening to go take a look at because I believe the Meridian Center, which was sponsoring this with AARP, left the recording online, so you can have because the interesting part of the conversation was that we had very concrete examples of how the decade on healthy aging and even contents of the Convention of Inter-American Convention on the rights of older persons are being implemented by countries such as Argentina and Costa Rica, right? Which are, as I mentioned, countries that have signed and ratified the convention, and they share, interesting perspectives.
Yep.
Of course, with the understanding that the health mandate is within PAHO, what I did is I shared some of what we've been talking about, what are the complementarities between the decade and the convention. But perhaps 3 takeaways that I would share now with you on the discussion, and as far as the mandate of work that we have at the OAS. Number 1 is that, we are talking about the health of older persons, but the health of older persons also depend on them being able to fully exercise and enjoy the full realm of all their rights. And this includes economic, social, cultural rights, which include health. Definitely, this is part of the economic and social rights, but also their civil and political rights, as well as the right to live life free of violence, with dignity, and the like. And in that sense, it was, a good it was very complementary, the discussions and the examples that they brought from these countries, and what, the different rights, the realm of rights that the Convention of Older Persons covers, no? And to prepare for our conversation today, I kind of went and listed, and it's 26, at least 26 rights that are contained in our convention that definitely complement the aspirations of the decade of healthy aging. Right to life and dignity in old age, independence and autonomy, participation and community integration. But it also goes to nationality and freedom of movement. And this comes, the issue of older persons who are also migrants, privacy, intimacy, work, housing. I mean, there are a series of issues, access to justice, equal recognition before the law. So that's definitely one takeaway. The second one that I brought to the discussion is to understand something that is part of the perhaps the conversations between human rights practitioners, which is understanding the concept of intersectionality, no? Or the idea that within us exist multiple identities that may either add privileges to our situation or actually put us in a situation of vulnerability. And in that regard, what the invitation that I did in that seminar was to really have this in our radar at the moment of designing public policies for older adults, because they may also be Afro-descendant, or they may also be LGBTI, or they may also be a woman, older woman in a rural area doesn't face the same reality as an older woman in an urban area. Really have this in the radar when we're discussing public policies to promote and protect the rights of older persons. And the last point that I also shared, and that was kind of like the lightning round at the end, in terms of what we expect of our leadership, in terms of the promoting and protecting the rights of older persons. There I definitely shared, which is something that is like our common message anywhere we go to work with governments of the region, which is to try to design public policies that have a human rights perspective. And by this we mean, it's not any in the abstract, this is really going to these documents, the conventions that we met, the older persons, but all the other conventions that we have in our inter-American system, and see how do I translate that commitment in a public policy and with specific indicators of implementation. So that's one thing. Of course, keeping the concept of intersectionality as we design public policies. And finally, as best as possible, or as much as possible, try to co-create these policies with the beneficiary populations, in this case, older persons.
Outstanding. So one other area that you've been in your broad responsibility, I've seen you publish lately quite a bit in the area, obviously, of COVID, and obviously COVID is not a disease just of the old age, but it disproportionately obviously has a substantial impact on the elderly. And you know, one of the things when I had Ambassador Lorca on the show, we talked about Costa Rica was very active in this development of the sort of the COVAX program with the WHO and all that. Talk us, if you would, say a couple of words, if you would, for the audience about some of the things that you're looking at OAS, in particular with regard to where we are with COVID in 2022 now, and some of the economic activity and health outcomes disparity work that you do.
Well, I must mention that at the beginning of the pandemic, back in April 2020, oh my God, it's going to be 2 years,
Yeah.
We put together a guide. It's called OAS Practical Guide to Respond to COVID with a Human Rights Perspective, inclusive and human and rights-based perspective. And what we did there, as fast as we could, is to map out the particular affectations of COVID-19 on various populations, right? And, you know, we cover migrants and refugees, children and adolescents, LGBTI people, women, and we have a specific chapter, which I invite also the audience to take a look. It's both in English and Spanish. One specific chapters on how the COVID-19 pandemic by then, or we anticipated, would affect older persons, including also not just recommendations of what to keep in mind in terms of the responses that could be developed by the member states, but pointing out resources. You know, go take a look at the convention, and this chapter covers issues of you know, access to health or the right to health. Go take a look at this guide by PAHO or by the WHO, or, you know, we kind of compile some resources because we didn't have a lot of information then. We perhaps have more information now. The key message from the standpoint of our Secretary General, Luis Almagro, on the COVID-19 has been definitely to realize that, you know, the pandemic affected us all, but it did not affect us all in the same way, you know, with this idea of intersectionality, how to understand that there's, you know, people experience the same reality very differently, and we needed to devise a social protection or any other type of public policy keeping this in mind. And he's been very adamant in terms of working with PAHO to ensure that all countries have access to vaccines. And there's kind of varying levels of, you know, amongst Latin American countries in terms of vaccination, vacunación is the term in Spanish, and trying to also prioritize the most vulnerable, or, you know, to the virus, which definitely include older persons. And here the key is also how to share the information with this population to ensure that, you know, any fears they may have in terms of the vaccine are dissipated, and they are given, they're facilitated the conditions for them to get the vaccine.
Excellent. One other topic, this sort of comes full circle now, but a couple of years ago, actually before COVID, I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Ambassador Juan Jose Gomez Camacho, who at the time was Mexico's ambassador, permanent representative of the United Nations. He's currently ambassador to Canada. And we were sort of discussing things at this sort of the intersection of migration, pandemics, and then he brought aging into the picture at the time, because migrants obviously have a whole set of issues, and you're more familiar with these than I am, but aging migrants and aging displaced people have their own unique situations.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to hand you this little triangle of aging, migration, and pandemics. You can fill in COVID or whatever you want to put in the pandemic spot, but just talk a little bit about this sort of, I won't call it the perfect storm, but sort of the issues with this very unique population, if you would.
Well, I guess definitely. I mean, you are very clear that, you know, just being a migrant or a displaced person puts the person in a situation of vulnerability. And then if you add these other variables, including being, you know, around 60 years of age or older, adds new vulnerabilities, or not, maybe not vulnerabilities, but, you know, the possibility of more potential violations of the rights of that person. Perhaps the key point here is that when it comes to understanding the numbers of older migrants, we don't really have a lot of information. I mean, I try to also review some data for you today, and the estimates that I found, and they're estimates really, put the number between 9 and 12% of all migrants and displaced populations, but we don't really know the exact situation of all of them. And in terms of the reasons why they migrate, it's also a combination of factors that include family reunification, the need of older persons to go meet their children or family members or grandkids in another country, especially if the situation in the country of origin has deteriorated.
Right.
There's also incentives related to being able to access health services or doctors or medicines in a country of destination that because they are not able to find it in their country of origin. And here I need to mention, I'm Venezuelan American, so I need to mention that this is a reality for a lot of Venezuelan migrants and refugees. Since 2015, we already have over 6 million people forcibly displaced, and we know that a lot of older migrants from Venezuela move because this is the only way they can have access to medical services and really some normalcy in terms of their health situation in another country. There's also it may just be a personal decision, no? Somebody who even at 60 has other projects to undertake and understands that there's more opportunities in another country for X or Y reason, depending on their situation. So, I mean, it's a combination of these factors from what I've seen in my experience working with migrants and refugees throughout the region that make them move. Again, in my conversations with a lot of them, and of course, the Venezuelan because of the volume, I get a lot of information on that, but this also applies to Central Americans coming to the US, which is kind of like their usual migratory route,
right.
Or Nicaraguans going to Costa Rica, and there's a lot of inter-regional migration happening in the South. Some of the challenges that kind of come from the migration or displacement of older persons include the possibility of them accessing their social security, their pension in the countries where they are arriving.
Yeah.
This is like the most common complaint and the most common element to organize older migrants in different countries. And I get a lot of that. And in the case of Venezuelans, with the added issue that everything they earn throughout their whole working life in bolívares, which is the native currency, doesn't mean anything today because the country faces a major hyperinflation, right. And those bolívares in dollars have really amounted to nothing. So this is a key issue. Another one that is not necessarily directly to their conditions has to do with the growing role of older persons in caring for the families of the younger people who live. And this is estragos, this is very worrisome, because it is older persons who are having to raise the kids of those because they had no choice, because that was the only way to make money and maintain their families, had to go to another country for work. And it is the weight of the raising of these kids is falling on older persons. And with the implications that it has also of having kids that don't have their maternal or paternal figure with them. So, and we can continue talking on this, but I would say those are the most common issues that come out in the conversations on older persons and migration, which, we can review in different angles, as I just did.
Yeah, no, that's it's fascinating hearing you talk about that, and you got me thinking about this theme that we've touched on previously. So this intergenerationality, where we see this dynamic of the grandparents playing this bigger role, but you brought it in from a totally different angle that I wouldn't have thought of. But that's that's a fascinating other perspective on
and
the
then
situation.
When the other issue that I mentioned there is that when the younger parents are able to bring their kids, I don't know, Venezuelan kids to Chile, which is where the parents have settled, or these kids brought from Honduras to the US where the parents have settled, Then the other problem that arises is the older person, the grandparent, being left alone with no real social protection in terms of whatever can be given by the state, plus not having the family network to support them in their elder years.
Yeah. Fascinating array of themes that we all need to think more about. But I appreciate you highlighting those. So what's coming up for you in 2022 in terms of new areas that you're going to be working on, things that you can talk about at this point, conferences you're going to be at, presenting? Please highlight some other things that I might have missed.
That's great. Well, I think we have a few priorities. Number one being at the OAS and the Department of Social Inclusion, we are technical secretariat to the meetings of high-level authorities or ministers of social development.
Okay.
And the Dominican Republic has offered to host the next meeting happening in November of 2022. With two key priorities, thematic priorities that include the measurement of multidimensional poverty, and then the second one being providing social protection to groups in vulnerable situations, and we will definitely include the situation of older persons. This is going to be a long process that's going to take a lot of time for us to prepare, starting yesterday when I presented the calendar to the member states all the way through November when we have to have the meeting. A second issue that we've been discussing is migration and forced displacement. I mean, we know that we have over 6 million Venezuelans who have been forcibly displaced since 2015. We have a lot of people from Central America passing through Mexico and stuck in the border between the U.S. and Mexico, and wanting to come to the U.S. I mean, the issue of migration is really high on the agenda, and this is where we've been able to secure funding from donors to implement projects. So we have a couple of projects, one in Costa Rica, another one with Central American countries, which we hope to continue implementing. And other activities dealing with groups in situation of vulnerability. A very active agenda of work we have is on this disability rights. And we have a committee that accompanies the implementation of the Inter-American Convention on Peoples with Disabilities. And there's already 3 or 4 very important meetings mapped out for the rest of the year. On a broader level, I will mention that the OAS's technical secretary as a whole, the OAS is technical secretariat to the Summit of the Americas process. And for anyone who's not familiar, the Summit of the Americas process is a meeting of heads of state, heads of government at the highest level, who are invited by the host country to really plan out what the key agenda of priorities for them for every 3 years. They meet on a triennial cycle. And in 2022, the Summit of the Americas will be hosted by the United States. It's going to take place in June in the city of Los Angeles, and we are already highly active, working with the U.S. government to prepare for that meeting happening again in Los Angeles in June of this year, and in which the issues of health, the issue of recovery post-COVID, migration are going to be high on the agenda.
So one final question when I have you. When you're not working on all these critical issues and thinking of all these, what do you do for fun? Do you jog around the mall? Do you head over to the Smithsonian? What do you do to relax when you're not thinking about these critical international issues?
Well, I have a very nice park in front of my house. So every chance I get, I try to go for walks and take my kids and relax a little bit. It has perfect lighting from the sun. Nice area, nice people, so I really enjoy going for walks. So that's definitely something I like to do. And I love my friends. I have different groups of friends, so something, maybe I don't go out as much, but I do like to invite them every so often to have dinners and kind of hang out. And I like to eat a lot.
Okay.
Me encanta
Me too.
comer. So I'm always, keeping an eye on the new restaurant and trying to get reservations to go try it out just for fun.
I can imagine that Washington, D.C. is a fun place to
Oh,
do
yes,
that
there's
as
a
well.
lot of good options.
Yeah.
Sí, sí, sí.
Absolutely. Well, it's been wonderful listening to you and listening to your journey and really rooting you on for everything that you're doing and everything on your rather broad portfolio here. It's exciting and wishing you the best with all of it as you continue to develop this fascinating area at OAS. For everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel. You've been listening to Dr. Betilde Muñoz-Pogossian, Director, Department of Social Inclusion at the Organization of American States. Betilde, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at the OAS. And as we say on this show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through all the work you do. Really fascinating story.
Thank you so much, Ira, for the invitation. I enjoyed the conversation.
It was great having you.
Mm-hmm.